Good evening, everyone. It's Philippa again. My name is Philippa Tumubwene, and on behalf of the school, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our annual prize giving and our Vivienne Jaffa and Len and Gunnel Hicks Memorial Lecture. This is a time where in the school, we celebrate and recognize the achievements of our students. It is a time when we acknowledge that we do indeed have good students. We have exceptional staff. We have a very good curriculum. We have world-class facilities in our world-class university. And through this event, we try and celebrate all of this. We celebrate this grounded within UCT's aspirations and vision to be an inclusive and engaged, research-intensive higher education institution. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause. We could take our mics off for a bit and let's congratulate the school through our students' achievements on actually managing to come to an end and complete 2020. Just mics off for a bit, let's congratulate ourselves. Oh, you can do better than that. Right, thank you everyone. So even though this year has been somewhat wobbly, I think is the correct word, we would like to retrospectively look back on what we did in 2019 and actually see the achievements we managed to accomplish then, looking forward to what we are going to do this year. And I'm very confident that this year we will manage to achieve the same standard, mainly because of our incredibly committed and dedicated student and staff body. How the order of events is going to run this evening. First, we will have our lecture, a memorial lecture. And tonight, we are very, very privileged to have Nina Maritz, who will be giving a lecture around her work, but also around something that she's very, very passionate about, which is climate change and the environment. Nina Maritz is one of our alumni. She was born and grew up in the Eastern Cape. Growing up, she accompanied her architecture lecturer parents on architecture excursions and became intrigued with space, form, and the interaction between inside and outside. At UCT, she was influenced by Mike Playden, Vivienne Jaffa, Ian Nutter, and Roelof Eitenborghardt, all who placed great emphasis on contextual responses, both socio-political and environmental. They also favored pragmatism and adaptability over the grand gesture of object buildings. Nina moved to Namibia after her graduation and started her own architectural practice in 1998. In her practice as an architect, Nina focuses on producing environmentally sustainable architectural interventions that respond to their context. She's the author of several award-winning projects, such as the Habitat Resource and Development Center, the 12-Fontaine Visitor Center, the Fish River Canyon Viewpoint, and the Shipwreck Lodge. All these projects strongly respond to context and are respectful of local landscape, society, culture, and budgets. These projects are but a small part of a larger portfolio of work, and they show how within Nina's approach to architectural intervention, she engages with efficiencies of resource management to propagate the idea that wasting resources is an economic and environmental crime. Nina's work demonstrates an inherent flexibility which allows constant change in program, structure, and space through the optimization of indoor and outdoor relationships. Nina is without a doubt an advocate for sustainable development within the built environment. And this is shown in the frequency with which she is invited to local, regional, and international events as a keynote speaker to share her passions around vernacular architecture, materials, and traditional craftsmanship, not just in architecture, the creative process, sensory perceptions, among other topics of interest. She's also currently teaching part-time at the University of Oregon. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me our speaker tonight, Nina Maritz, who will be presenting the 2020 Vivienne Jaffa and Len and Gunnel Hicks Memorial Lecture titled Weaving Architecture, Weaving a New World. Welcome, Nina.
Greetings from Namibia. I often get asked why I become an architect. Sometimes I just want to answer, to wear ridiculous spectacles and get away with it. But it's actually a serious question. Why does one become an architect, especially in Africa? Is it to make lots of money, to gain status and be respected, unleash your creativity, or become a famous architect? Of the past 42 Pritzker and 30 Premium Imperiale Awards, none were given to Africans, and of the 12 UIA gold medals, only one has been to an African. The few websites on renowned African architects almost all repeat the same four names: Kunde Adiemi, David Ajayi, Francis Kere, Mokena Makeka, three of whom have their offices in Europe. A 2018 online Wired magazine article on the best architecture in Africa, in inverted commas, shows 7 projects with only 2 designed by African architects. A 2015 Daily Online article does a little better. Of the 7 pioneers of an African awakening, at least 4 originate from Africa. Our usual suspects, Ajayi, Kere, Adeyemi, Makeka, and also Mpete Moriele. However, only 3, of which one is Spanish, have their offices in Africa. It seems that to get any recognition, you have to leave the continent. But before we get worked up about the unfairness, must our biggest ambition as African architects be to become internationally recognized? Of course not. There are far more important issues than whether we get our fair share of exposure. In any case, with an estimated 3.6 million architects in the world, what are the chances of many of us becoming star architects anyway? Over centuries, Africa has been maligned as the dark continent. As Chinyere Achebe says about Conrad's novel The Heart of Darkness, it projects the image of Africa as the other world, the antithesis of Europe and therefore civilization. On the world stage, Africa has been struggling with this image and is still living with the depredations of centuries of colonialism. Modern development narratives tell the same story. Several indicators state that African countries are of the worst in the world when it comes to poverty and general human development. This multidimensional poverty index map shows 101 developing countries' land surfaces, resized by population, then colored according to the percentage of multidimensionally poor. Again, Africa is the darkest. There's no denying that African populations are extremely disadvantaged compared to the rest of the world. But this ecological footprint map depicts the other side of the coin. It shows the amount of land needed per capita to sustain a country's consumption patterns. Green areas are lower or equal to the Earth's biocapacity. Yellow areas are higher, up to double the biocapacity, and the deep red areas need between 4 and 6 times the planet's biocapacity. Who are the darkest now? Comparing these two maps, we should question whether we really want to mimic the developed world and adopt their consumption patterns. Do we want to become as they are, dark red in the destruction of the planet? The environmental crisis is inarguably the greatest challenge society is facing. As the world continues on the same path, we face an unprecedented apocalypse in human history. Our concern about power, money, and status is fast becoming irrelevant in the face of starvation and war over resources. Instead of merely postponing our planetary day zero, we must prevent it from ever happening. Ignoring sustainability as an architect is like making the beds while your house burns down. The author George Orwell's reason for being creative culminates in political purpose in its broadest sense, a desire to push the world in a certain direction. We need to face that. As architects in Africa, our work is unquestionably political. We must desire to push the world in a different direction. Architects do exercise power and do protect and advance particular ideas and goals. So we are already engaged in politics, whether we acknowledge it or not. In today's political arena, our greatest political challenge is the climate. How should architects engage with this challenge? It's a bit like voting or not voting. Even by not voting, you express your stance and influence the outcome. And if your stance is apathy, by all means ignore climate change. But by doing nothing, you are in fact doing harm. So how can architects do good instead of harm? We can only do good by advocating for and making sustainable, resilient, and regenerative architecture. And this means for every project, whether it is academic, commercial, institutional, residential, or anything else. But how do we make such architecture? As architects, we just tend to do our thing, just carry on without thinking how this thing called design works. But the process creates the outcome. And looking at the statement of Einstein's, I started unraveling the process a little. We all understand design as a process towards a goal. To make more sense of this, our professional practice systems divide it into stages: briefing, concept, development, technical, construction. Of course, the process is not a linear one. It diverges and converges. And it reiterates, sometimes restarting completely. So the design process is more like weaving a basket or a textile. It's built on the basis of a warp, architectural principles which form the supporting structure. Setting up the warp is the first step to establish our principles. Many principles are internalized and reflect our conscience and character as individual. As we grow with experience, our principles get stronger and sometimes weaker, depending on how flexible we remain or how rigid we become. In weaving, the technique and the character of the threads, their thickness and thinness, textures ranging from rough to smooth, and variety of colors used all create a unique identity of the design. By deconstructing the professional work stages into these 5: curiosity, concept, craft, construct, and consequence, I managed to look at the process in a new way. Guided by and weaving through the warp threads, the design process repeatedly encounters and engages with these principles, creating the weft. And the process is not one way, it continually returns, repeating each engagement with a bit more weight behind it. It may seem that the process only encounters one principle at a time, but it carries the mark of every previous encounter and, like basket weaving, can zigzag across the warp to link principles across each other at different stages. What happens when principles meet process? I'd like to show you some of our experiences. During the first stage, curiosity, we don't take what clients say at face value only, but really delve into the situation. We interrogate the brief, the people, the site, the context, sometimes to the extent of having to explain that we don't intend an invasion of their privacy, but that we are trying to understand the issues as well as we can. Engaging deeply with this is essential, beyond the point of just executing the client's wishes. This is where a strong principle comes in: start right. Some years ago, we were doing a feasibility for a school on a proposed site within a national park. It was a greenfield site, had no services, and conflict with elephants was inevitable. We managed to convince the authorities to build a school in the closest town, where it was not only cheaper and more accessible, but at less risk from elephant damage and less harmful to the environment. Small is beautiful is a very powerful principle. We applied this to the school by keeping its layout really compact. We made the academic portion into one double-story building instead of the conventional spread-out single-story buildings. This left more land untouched and allowed space for future expansion. With a little probing, we often discover that the client's need is different from what they think. Perhaps they don't need an architectural project at all, especially in the case of build it and they will come projects. Sometimes you just have to tell clients, for what you need, you don't need us yet, but you do need XYZ. In one community development project, the brief was to build a bakery. However, the community's only shop already had a bakery supplying the local schools with bread. Duplication would not have made economic sense, so we proposed a campsite, which had more income-generating potential and could be used to house cultural festivals, visiting sports teams, etc. That brings us back to curiosity. If clients, for example, want to build a school but have no idea where to start or how to run it, do you as architect know enough to help them in the right direction? The second stage. Concept is just so much more than an idea on its own. It's the seed, the skeleton, the fundamental framework of any great work of art or science. It's not simplistic but rich in meaning. To generate concepts, we like to use a layered approach, a kind of multiplicity. This might include the use of metaphor, of mimicry of form, and various other layers derived from the context. At the Twyfelfontein Visitor Centre, we were inspired by the landforms, traditional sand brush shelters, the rock art images, as well as the concept of trance. And it all intersected with the principle of passive design. So, for instance, the centre opens to the north, away from the rock art site, adding to the mystery of discovering the rock art. Pragmatism is often derided as compromising the poetry of design. However, I strongly believe that pragmatism can also lead to poetry. To resolve the problem of leftover drum lids from the recycled drum roof sheeting for Twyfelfontein, we use them for the privacy screens. I do believe that here we achieve something similar to poetry, which have a quality of beauty and an intensity of emotion. Stage 3. Craft. How should we put African architecture together? Making buildings require craft. We often bemoan the lack of skills on the continent, but perhaps we should look a bit further for the skills that are there and adapt our approach to include those which are unique and already exist in some form. We are not Japanese, Swiss, or German. This is not to say that we cannot be as sophisticated as these nations are, but do we need to emulate the rather dull grey precision which stem from their particular national characters? Instead of focusing on the lacks and wrongs, we can start looking at what we are good at and draw inspiration from this. After all, an asset-based approach is so much more effective than a deficit-based approach. Perhaps we should pursue existing and unique skills expressed in local materials. For example, weaving gives fabulous ideas for screens, warning, ceilings, don't you think? The climate in most of Africa is far more benign than that of the far northern and southern latitudes of the world. So fighting against climate in our buildings seemed to me to be a futile exercise. Passive design can maximize a structure's own abilities to mellow out the vagaries of temperature and light, instead of rejecting the natural environment and making a completely artificial interior one. In our regional libraries, we used passive design principles to inform the morphology, among other things. The largest roof surfaces face north at the optimum pitch for solar panels. This also allowed us to slip in a mezzanine to create split-level interiors. Sometimes such passive devices, like the sun trap of a ramp, can give rise to quite poetic space making. The concept of multifunctionality, such as in permaculture, where every design action should have at least two functions, which are not primarily aesthetic, links us back to pragmatism. At the libraries, we used external screens as external shading to reduce glare, to form security barriers, and to signpost the activities of the building. Stage 4. Construct. Isn't it interesting that the meaning of a construct is inherently also a concept? Any efforts to compartmentalize process are doomed to failure, no matter how much we try, and during construction, all our design chickens come home to roost. As architects, We generally think about the lifespan of our buildings, whether it will last as long as it needs to, but we seldom think about afterwards. Buildings may not last forever, but much of their fabric does. What happens to that? In the Shipwreck Lodge, not only was it a concession requirement that the structures must be able to be removed after 25 years, we also did not want to end with unusable debris at that time. So, the buildings can be fully dismantled and carted away, erected somewhere else, or reconfigured into something new. To minimize waste during construction, as much as possible was pre-manufactured in town in panels and components, and only assembled on site. What we know, we learn from others, and it is important to pass it on. We architects can be so precious about our intellectual property that we forget that most of it was already thought of or done by someone else first. We often get asked for advice on how to build with alternative materials, and it seems that, despite the plethora of information on the internet, people are still looking for simple, straightforward advice. So we are starting to make little booklets to explain some of the basics from our experiences, such as this one on stone gabions, to give out. A project is never complete with final handover, and although, like these monkeys, we would prefer to see no problems, speak no doubts, and hear no complaints, we need to face the consequences of our work. It is as essential to go back from time to time and see how it has evolved. And this is where the principle of courage comes in. It's defined as the ability to do something that frightens or daunts one. And there's nothing as daunting as to be confronted with your own mistakes. But it is crucial to own up to them and learn from them. Perhaps the principle can also be called compromise instead of courage. Well, we should never be afraid to compromise. As architects, we do so much more than design buildings. We build society and can make our environments weaker or stronger. The ideal good design is often posited at the sweet spot between Vitruvian principles of beauty, functionality, and structural soundness. We are taught in professional practice to be awfully careful so that we don't get sued, and the architectural community can be an exceptionally vicious one when criticizing its peers, so we're trying to avoid criticism of any kind. And at university we are taught to absorb the predominant architectural dogma, with a strong bias to aesthetics being the primary concern. Being young and impressionable, we end up being terribly orthodox, often having lost ourselves in the process. So instead of a balance of Vitruvian principles, aesthetics rule, and the engineers must make sure that the buildings don't fall down. Meantime, the planet is burning. To do sustainable work, one must have the courage to question what you've learned about architecture, and the courage to face that although an architect, you do not have all the answers. You need courage to find your own identity and hold fast when criticized by others in the profession. And most of all, you need some daring to try out new ways of doing things, not just the tired, old, unsustainable tried and tested. This might all sound as if I think we've hit on a winning recipe. By no means. We seldom manage to achieve these aims, but we keep on trying. If anyone else has got it right, please let me know. We're always keen to learn more. As Einstein said, life is like riding a bicycle. You have to keep moving in order not to fall off. Kalaponawa.
Okay, thank you very much, Nina, for that talk. We really appreciate it. I'm sure there's some questions. Would anyone like to ask Nina some questions about the talk? You can pop it into the chat or you could raise your hand. Garen Stevens says thank you. Stella says, claps her hands. It's quite a few of you. No questions?
I do have a question, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
It's probably more of just a tongue-in-cheek question. Have you ever had a project where you knew it was already not necessarily answering the brief in the best way it could, but you kind of had to go ahead and complete it? Is that ever something that happens often, or is there always a sense of stepping back and finding the time to make it work the way you think it would or think it should?
My first government project, I can clearly remember, it was a standard clinic and we had to use these standard plans. And when we were sort of 3/4 of the way, I realized that the people who drew up the standard plans had never considered where the furniture goes, what activities are, etc., etc. So the next time I got a clinic, I said to them, I refuse to use the standard plans. We are going to sit and workshop this. They had to explain to me how they weigh the babies, when what the movements are and so on. So we did a building layout that showed all the furniture and equipment in it. And it was a big lesson for me because, I was young, government standard plans, you think you don't have a choice. But I learned my lesson very quickly.
Cool, thank you.
Anyone else?
It doesn't just have to be questions, it can be comments as well.
Oh, thank you.
People can disagree. People can disagree with me if they want.
Disagreement is welcome.
Yeah. Any kind of discussion.
So it's a comment, maybe it's a question comment. One of your slides says we're all in a car heading towards a wall and we're fighting about where we're sitting. Within architecture or architectural schools, how do you see that sometimes play out? Because you're part of an architectural school, you've been to lots of architectural schools.
I think there's often a lot of rivalry in strains of thought. Either somebody is a modernist proponent or somebody thinks that parametric design is the answer to the future. It often goes together with a bit of a kind of a missionary instinct. And I think the students are aware of these ideology clashes and they tend to choose certain directions. But the problem is that they're confronted just with those ideologies. They're not opened up to the fact that there's a world out there and that an ideology is like a religion. If you take it too seriously, you can become completely obsessed and narrow-minded just following that ideology.
Right, thank you. That's an interesting answer. Nina, I think there's no more questions. I don't see any questions, but there's a lot of good comments in the chat. That was a very, I think, quite a hard-hitting, short, compressed talk, and thank you very much. So thank you very much for the lecture. For me, it was very, very illuminating, and we're very glad that you could make it to join us for this occasion.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Nina. All right. So we'll move on to the next part of this event, which is the prize giving ceremony. But before we start to hand out prizes, I would like to thank and acknowledge our sponsors for the various prizes that we'll be handing over tonight. Our sponsors' continued support and commitment to excellence within the school is the reason we can actually have this event. And to all our sponsors who are present today, we would like to say that we are aware and we're continually enriched by your partnership with us, your collaborations with us, and your presence tonight through these awards. So starting off with the Architecture Prize sponsors, we have the Cape Institute of Architects, where the South African Institute of Architects, the South African Council for the Architectural Profession, the Aluminium Federation of South Africa, Corobrick, the Clay Brick Association, the Ivor Prinsloo Foundation, Holm Jordan Architects and Urban Designers, Bruce Barmeister Architects and Associates, KMH Architects. For the city and regional planning sponsors, we have South African Planning Institute, both on a national and local level, which is the Cape Town branch, the South African Association of Consulting Professional Planners, the Western Cape Government, the Carl Brackenhaig family, and the Patrick McAlson family. For the landscape architecture sponsors, we have the Institute of Landscape Architects of South Africa, OVP Associates, CNDV Landscape Architects, and New World Associates. For the urban design sponsors, we have UDISA, which is the Urban Design Institute of South Africa. I'd like to thank, now that we've thanked all our sponsors, I'd also like to acknowledge the people that put this virtual event together. We have Mrs. Janine Mayer, we have Mrs. Natasha Davids, Mr. Niven Stanley, and the ever-efficient administrative and technical staff in the school. Thank you very much for putting this event together, for collecting all the information, getting everybody to submit their work, putting together the PowerPoint, and liaising with our speaker for tonight, Nina Moritz. So I'll go straight into the prize giving. So first, I'm going to mention prizes that have already been awarded, and then we'll move into the awarding of the different prizes. So the prizes that are only for mention is the Corobrick Final M.Arch prizes, the Regional Architectural Student of the Year Award, who is Sebastian Hitchcock, the first runner-up, Sean Mash, second runner-up, Oliver Brown, the best project using clay masonry, Oliver Brown, the most innovative final year landscape architectural project, Josie Delberg, runner-up on the most innovative final year landscape architectural project, Amber Mayers, the Royal Town Planning Institute for the best student in the planning program, Dane Hoskins, the University Class Medal for the best student in design and theory 2, David Rousseau, the University Class Medal, best student in design and theory Studio 3, Gemma Dobrin. And now for the prizes that we'll be awarding tonight. This is the work of the students being awarded from last year. It will be shown on the PowerPoint. We'll start with the Bachelor of Architectural Studies prize winners. For the John Perry Prize, best work done in third year, we have Dylan Tijada. For the Reuben Stubbs Award, best project in structure and design in second year, David Rousseau. The Reuben Stubbs Award, best project in structure and design in the third year, we have Poloka Leteka. For the Molly Memorial Prize for the best woman student completing the third year of study in the BAS, we have Gemma Dobrin. For the Helen Gardner Travel Prize, which is a prize that is awarded on application for the student who has satisfactorily completed first, second, and third year in all their major courses, Simon Muller. We'll move into the Lisa Blaine Memorial Prizes. The best overall student in technology 2, based on the overall mark, David Rousseau. The most improved student in technology 2, Brittany Kahn and Gabriel Chams. The best student in technology 3, Tilani Utle. For the student who displayed the most innovative use of technology in the third year of the BAS, Simon Muller. We'll move into the Cape Institute of Architects and the South African Institute of Architects and the South African Council for the Architectural Profession prizes. For the best student, Design and Theory Studio 2, David Rousseau. The best student in Design and Theory Studio 3, Gemma Dobrin. For the best student graduating in the postgraduate architectural degree programs, Sebastian Hitchcock. For the best student graduating in the M.Arch Prof program, Sebastian Hitchcock. For the best student based on final 2 years of study for the professional degree in architecture, Sebastian Hitchcock. For the best student in quantity surveying or architecture in the subject of professional practice, Felicia Mudley. For the best student for work done over 5 years, Sean Mash. We'll move into the Coral Brick and Clay Brick Association prizes. For the best project entailing the innovative use of clay bricks from work done in the second year, Miller Ashton. For the best project entailing the innovative use of clay bricks for work done in third year, Tihedi. For the student who has made the best use of clay brick in his or her design, Miller Ashton. We'll move to the Harlem Udan Architects and Urban Designers prizes. For the project of merit that deals with sustainability and environmental issues in BAS, David Rousseau. For the project of merit that deals with sustainability and environmental issues in the BAS Honors and MArch Prof, Anna Stelsner, Andreas Mattia, and Marilise Lawrence. For the B Honors and MArch prizes, we have the General J.B.M. Herzog Prize for the best final year student in architecture in the MArch Prof, Sean Mash. The Ivo Prinsloo Prize for the best essay in architectural theory in the postgraduate architectural programs, Seth Gottlieb. We have the Essay Prize for the best student in B Honors who produced the best essay, Seth Gottlieb. The South African Planning Institute, Western Cape Government, and Generia prizes for planning programs. We have the prize for the best student in the first year, planning and urban design programs, Stefan van Veenendaal. Prize for the most improved student over the 2-year planning curriculum, Alma Delgado. Prize for the best overall student in the second year MCRP and MUD programs, Dane Hoskins. Prize for the best MCRP dissertation, Dane Hoskins. For the best local area planning project, Project A, was Zipiwe Sigwala. She's also a librarian. For the best metropolitan planning project, Project B, Michael Hawthorne and Ludolf Lowe. For the best regional planning project, Dane Hoskins. For the best MCRP student, Dane Hoskins. For the best student in the regulatory and legal framework course in planning, Michael Hawthorne. We'll move to the OVP Associates, the Institute for Landscape Architecture of South Africa, CNDV Landscape Architects and New World Prizes. For the best student in the first year of the Master of Landscape Architecture program, Kathy Huang. For the best student in the second year in the Master of Landscape Architecture program, Ivo Sos. For the best landscape design portfolio in the first year, Kathy Huang. For the best landscape architecture dissertation, Ivo Sos. For the best student in landscape construction in second year, MLA, Ivo Sos. For the best student in history and in the MLA program, Amber Myers. For the best use of plants in the landscape, Kirsten Miller. Last but most certainly not least, the Urban Design Institute of South Africa, prize awarded to the top student in the urban design program, Philippa Headley. Thank you very much. Thanks, Nina, for that. It is lots of prizes. So on behalf of the school, this is very odd because usually at this stage we would invite you to the foyer for drinks and snacks. I've got my drink. I hope you've got one as well. You can have snacks at home. Thank you. I see you, Nina's got one as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, for joining us. A very big thank you to Nina Maritz, who was our laureate for this evening. Thank you for an incredible talk. Thank you very much to the students and staff that worked incredibly hard to achieve these milestones. Your work is recognized, and it's, I think, what makes this school incredibly formidable as a built environment school. One of our strengths is that we do cross over, and we cross over the entire built environment. We have overlaps between the different programs, and your commitment and dedication that has been shown tonight, I think, is a validation of the work that we do. Ladies and gentlemen, a big, massive round of applause for the School of Architecture, Planning and Geomatics. Thank you very much. You can take your mics off and we can just applause each other. Thank you very much, and hopefully next year I will see you in person. We're working very hard to ensure that that happens because I can't do one more Zoom prize giving. I don't think I can handle it. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah. Best student of second year, best dissertation, and best landscape project, landscape construction project.
Cool. Ivo, I see you're very proud of yourself. Well done.
Amazing.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to everyone.